Happy Wednesday, folks. We are here. Kevin Allen is here. It's the day before the opening of training camp. I know that I'll be driving up to Toronto for the medical evaluations and the press conferences that Kyle Dubas and Mike Babcock hold on Thursday, and they'll be opening up training camp in Niagara Falls on Friday. But Russ, you have something football related to talk to Kevin about.
I do. Well, I do want to say as a whole, and this will affect you too, Mike, I did write an article this morning on the quarterback class of 2018, because back in the day, the quarterback class of 1983 was talked about for a long time.
Sure.
And not necessarily because of all the talent, but also because of where teams picked guys and such. Like, Sam Darnold for the Jets. That was the guy I wanted for the Jets, but I looked at things and said, boy, I don't know if they can get him. But they did, right? And in other drafts, guys dropped. The Bills got Josh Allen. You said he's starting this week. Mm-hmm. So that's the start of a new clock for them. But Kev, I got to tell you, I was amazed at that Lions game for one reason. I was looking at the crowd, and late in the fourth quarter, there were people still there, like watching it, like they were watching a neighbor's house burn down.
Yeah, no, and that's a great analogy, because that is the reaction here in Detroit about that. And I think it's twofold, because number one, we now have a transplant of supposedly the Patriots culture. We have a coach, Patricia, who's from there, and obviously Quinn is the general manager of Detroit, is from there as well. And guess what? They don't look anything like the Patriots. And in fact, I think what's so disheartening for Lions fans is it looks as if the team has regressed. When you looked at the inactive list, it contained a couple of players that were drafted by Quinn. The depth chart shows some of his draft picks are well down. Mm-hmm. But more importantly, the defense, which was supposedly going to improve under our new coach here in Detroit, it really looks overmatched. Like, the offense will eventually come around, but it looks like there's a talent deficiency on the defense. And, when you factor that in with the fact that in my lifetime, I've only seen one playoff win by the Lions.
That's crazy.
And I'm overseeing. I mean, that's just nuts.
I wore this because this is the only time the Jets have won the AFC, and like in the last 30 years because of Belichick. So that's why I wore this hat.
Well, but believe me, winning the AFC isn't that big of a deal, Russ. I know in Buffalo. But Kevin, the funny thing is that the Belichick tree is not exactly like, the Bill Walsh tree. I mean, Romeo Crennel, Charlie Weiss, Bill O'Brien, Eric Mangini, Nick Saban was a bust in the NFL. I mean, we're not Josh McDaniel. We're not talking a lot of success.
No, I know, and I wonder too. Like, and I had this conversation with a non-reporter, just a fan in Detroit, and he was just pointing out that maybe we tend to exaggerate, the presence, the aura of guys that are standing around Belichick.
We do,
like kind of the aura that Patricia had when he was in with the Patriots. It looked like he was just so engaged, and then you watch him as head coach of the Lions, and he looks lonely down there. Like, you wonder what he's doing. It's such a frustration to be a Lions fan, and for years people talked about the Cubs situation, and then finally the Red Sox went through it. But the Lions situation, when you consider they've never been to a Super Bowl, and they haven't won a championship. I'm 62 years old, and I was one the last time they won a championship.
Yeah, I can tell you the stories of me curled up in a ball when Scott Norwood missed the field goal in Super Bowl 25, Kevin. So believe me, Super Bowls are overrated.
Well, here's the weird thing. They finally got their franchise quarterback in Stafford, and they're eating through his career now. Now all of a sudden he's taking a beating out there.
No, and that's the right word too. Like, they're eating through his career, because Stafford, and not all Detroit fans feel this way, but I think he's a good quarterback.
Yes.
But I just think he's not had the right personnel. But just the team and the ownership. And the funny thing is there's a feeling that William Clay Ford, the late William Clay Ford's widow, is not like her husband. There's a feeling that if this, if they go out to the West Coast and get hammered again, that she might, demand, because everyone had the impression that she wanted to keep Caldwell. She found him to be a decent human being, and they were 9-7, and she was kind of talked into making a change, and she didn't understand why. The players actually said, he's doing a good job. Everybody liked him. And I'm not sure she likes what she sees on the field. Yeah. So it's going to be interesting to see. The Jets aren't that good. That's the
no, I know. I realize that. But, I mean, that was just, crazy. That game, to watch that was crazy.
Yeah,
it really was.
And Kevin, the Bills, I mean, I referred to their offensive line as 5 turnstiles or 5 Aki Bergs, basically letting defensive linemen go by them. And that's why I'm a little against them putting Allen in there, because this is a kid who everybody said when they drafted him, he's going to need time to develop. And now the time to develop was a half. And they brought him in the second half, and now they're throwing him into the wolves with a bad offensive line, and facing a team, the LA Chargers, whose defense is pretty good. So, I mean, it's not going to just be a one-game thing. I think if they're going to him in week 2, they're probably going to go with him for the rest of the season. And this is abuse that I don't know if he's ready to take, and we'll see. There's been successes and there's been failures throwing a quarterback to the wolves, and I think that's sort of what's happening here. But we'll see.
Yeah, the one thing I will say about the Lions situation, the best thing and this will be a good segue, that happened to them this week is somebody quit in Tampa, which has turned hockey to the forefront and moved the Lions down in the pecking order, which I think we'll talk about as we start the show.
You read my mind. Hello, Hockey World. Today is Wednesday, September 12th, 2018.
I'm Russ Cohen from Sportsology.
Kevin Allen of USA Today Sports.
And I'm Michael Lagello, and this is the Hockey Buzzcast here on HockeyBuzz.com. As Kevin mentioned, we'll start off with the Steve Yzerman talk. And I know that, Kevin, you wrote a piece for USA Today on this, and it sort of shocked us all. I was up in Toronto yesterday, and I was sort of going back and forth on show ideas to talk about. And then all of a sudden, around noon, it came down that Yzerman was resigning and going into an advisory role for the final year of his contract with Tampa Bay. And immediately the speculation popped up of Detroit. And we know that Kenny Holland has got a 2-year extension this summer. But, what can you enlighten us on in regard?
Well, first of all, I think it's in this day and age, I think it's really impressive that they kept this under wraps. And I think the way they were able to do that is I think this was basically done between the owner, Jeff Vinnick, and Yzerman. And we all know that Yzerman's kind of a private guy. He doesn't have, he keeps the media at arm's length, and that's just his personality and the way he does business. And but saying all that, I normally when these things happen and there's instant speculation, I usually roll my eyes saying, oh boy, well, because oftentimes what you see is what you get. And for the reason for Yzerman leaving, I think he's entirely truthful. There's no conspiracy theory here. It's too bad X not here, because I'm sure he has one, but there really isn't. He had homes in 2 cities, Tampa and Detroit. He is a Detroiter. His family was still in Detroit. Even though his children are older, he is very close to his family. One of them is involved in horses, and the horses are here. It was hard for him to on a regular basis, grab that 6 a.m. flight from Tampa to Detroit. And, he had to make a decision between this lifestyle that was difficult for him and being the family guy. And, if anyone who knows Yzerman, he's so competitive. He wants to put his heart and soul into everything, and he felt he really couldn't do that if he was going to maintain, kind of the relationship with his family that he really wanted. So he decided to make this move, and it was a couple months in the making. It was talked about what it was going to do. He has 1 year remaining on the contract. Well, the reason why I think it's fair to talk about what this means for Detroit is a variety of reasons. Number one, Yzerman has distinguished himself in Tampa Bay. Number 2, he is so popular among the fan base here. in Detroit, and there's disenchantment with what's going on with the Red Wings. And Ken Holland has been one of the league's most highly respected general managers, but as often the case, the fans have grown weary of the fact that they haven't done well. They've bottomed out. This season's not expected to be a strong one. They're going to play a lot of younger players. They could really easily be in the lower five and be in the hunt for the Jack Hughes sweepstakes. But more importantly, and this is why I think there is some credibility to this, you hear rumblings that the season ticket base is starting to erode. And if that's the case, and this season we see empty seats in Joe Louis Arena, Little Caesars Arena, I think that's going to cause some issues. And I just think that when his contract expires next summer, if he's available, and the one place where he can be both a great family man and a hockey guy is Detroit. Now, does that mean they would replace Ken Holland? I doubt it. He's got a good relationship with Marian Ilitch. I think it's possible that they just might bring Yzerman in at first as a consultant. Let's not forget Kenny Holland is 62 years old. Yzerman is, not quite 10 years younger. So at some point, maybe they just say, we're going to let Ken have 2 or 3 more years, and then we'll move Yzerman in and Holland moves up. I mean, I don't know how it would work, but it's hard for me not to believe, given Yzerman's popularity, given his level of expertise, given where the Red Wings are at, that the Red Wings wouldn't find a way to bring him into management. That's just my feeling, having observed the Red Wings for a long time. Yzerman was very close to the Ilitches. And when he went to Tampa, there was discussion about Holland moving up and Yzerman staying in Detroit. Holland didn't want to do it at that point. But that was, 8 years ago. And, who knows how it has changed. But, that's the way I do it. There's some other factors here. They've got other people that they're grooming too. Chris Draper is being groomed as a management guy. They got Ryan Martin, who's done a good job and has started to appear on other teams' lists as well. So, there's some other factors to consider. But I think at some point Yzerman will be back in the organization.
Yeah, when I saw the tweet yesterday from Helen St. James, I did bring up on the show after we speculated for a bit that, hey, maybe he is just sort of feeling the grind and is burning out, because I don't know if I saw a harder working GM than him. Like, he just always was at it. Even in the summer, we were hearing from him. He was at it. He was at this Karlsson thing all summer. So I just, and that's what I said. I've seen this position sort of grind guys into dust at times. And so maybe he is taking a breather, but I could see him in Detroit, and I could see, look, Ron Hextall got moved into Philly when Paul Holmgren was still there. They did it. Detroit can do it.
Well, and I think your point is a really, really good one about how he grinds. When he left the game as a player, a lot of stars tend to believe that, they can move right into management and not learn the business. Yzerman learned the business. And I remember Kenny Holland telling me that Yzerman was willing to do all the grunt work that needs to be done. He went and scouted players. He was involved in all the little stuff that is not stuff that GMs like to do. They like to be, make the trades and be the wheeler dealer. And Yzerman was willing to do everything. And I think, as you said, I think that sort of grinds you down.
That's his work ethic. He was that same kind of guy as a player.
Yeah. Yes, that's exactly right. And I think that's a big blow too. Don't underestimate. They believe, they being the Lightning, that Brisebois, will end up being an impact GM. He's well thought of around the league. He's a very bright guy, and they could be right. But right now, the one thing that organization had was an aura, a prestige, a presence, because they had Yzerman.
Right.
Yzerman, when he talks, people listen, as we all know. And I think that is one of the reasons why they have such a dedicated fan base. I think the fan base, a lot of it was built on their trust that Yzerman was in there wheeling and dealing and getting things done. He was a very aggressive general manager. So it'll be interesting to see whether the fan base, has the same faith in Brisebois, who, is a very talented individual, but just doesn't have the reputation that Yzerman has.
Luckily, at this time of the year, Brisebois won't have to do a lot, so that's good.
Well, but here's the thing, Yzerman was working on Karlsson and he was working hard on it. So now what happens? So if if Brisebois doesn't get Karlsson, do fans say, well, if Yzerman would, he would have figured it out. So
well, the one thing that I thought of immediately when there is a new level of stratification in NHL management. We've seen it with Toronto with Brendan Shanahan having some hands-on control as team president. Brendan Shanahan doesn't live all the time in Toronto. I believe he still lives in New York. So, yeah. I mean, I'm surprised if there was a will for Yzerman to stay with the Lightning, that he wasn't just kicked upstairs and allowed Brisebois to be general manager, and then maybe just took a little bit of a hands-off approach, or maybe spent more time in Detroit. In this instance, I think, he's still going to be an advisor for a year, but I think you're right, Kevin. I think it just makes too much sense with the rumors of Ken Holland being potentially interested in going to Seattle, and his place in the hearts of Red Wings fans, that he could just immediately step in next year when his contract is up and, help things out.
Yeah. I mean, I know we're going to have to kind of see how it all plays out. But it was telling that Yzerman said, at the press conference that he had no idea what he was going to do after next season, and which, it wasn't so much. It's what he didn't say. He didn't say, well, I may just re-up with, the Tampa Bay Lightning, that, just because he did say that next year he planned to be wherever Brisebois needed him. But he didn't say that. He just said, I have no idea what's going to happen. And, the one thing I would say about Steve is it's been hard for him. He's been asked a lot about going back to Detroit. But, he has respect for Kenny Holland, and he's in a bad spot because Holland, guided him in his managerial rise. They respect each other. So I don't know how Yzerman actually even feels about that. I mean, he's not a guy that, he knows the impact that Holland's had with the team and with the league. I'm not sure that he'd feel real good about coming in and having everyone believe that Yzerman was waiting for Holland to be pushed out.
Well, what if Holland, could get to Seattle? Like, if that was going to be the thing, like, hey, Yzerman comes in, and if Seattle has interest in Holland, then maybe that's where Ken Holland would go. Yeah,
maybe. I never would have thought that was possible until you saw, the sweet situation that George McPhee now has. And, McPhee is, sort of from the same classification or division as Holland, kind of an older general manager who had been around the block, had been with one team a long time, and he ends up in Vegas, where he has a situation far better than he had before. I mean, Holland may be in a similar situation, because I would say this, Ken Holland does not want to be a team president. Like, that's not him. That just isn't. And he's already rejected moving up once. And the other element in play here is that, guys don't quit in the NHL at 65. Sure. David Boyle is over 70. Jimmy Rutherford's pushing 70. Lou Lamoriello will be a GM when he's 80.
Sater's still working.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a lot of guys that just stay on and on. So, this is a complicated situation, and I think all the factors, like attendance and how much the team grows and all that. But one thing I do know is that the ability for Steve Yzerman to be a hockey guy and go home at night to a bet in Detroit was a lot more desirable than what he had going in Tampa. As much as he loved the team and doing that job, I think it was just a strain on him personally to do it.
Now, a good segue, because you mentioned George McPhee in Vegas, is the Pacioretty deal that happened earlier this week. I just wanted to get your thoughts on it, Kevin, because I looked at that deal, and this was before the extension was signed, and said it only made sense if an extension was being signed, because Vegas gave up a lot more than Buffalo did for Jeff Skinner. And I know Pacioretty is a more valuable player, a different type of player, but that was a heavy price to pay for him, and then they get him locked up for 4 years, $28 million, $7 million AAV. What did you think of that deal?
I didn't think it was a heavy price. I know, I think Suzuki was a good prospect to be sure, but Pacioretty is a proven 30-goal scorer. I think it's an upgrade on James Neal. So now, they lost James Neal. They get him back. They've got him committed. Not for 6 years or whatever, but 4 years, which is a reasonable contract. I think they'll get a reinvigorated Pacioretty, and you got to give something up to get a player of his magnitude. Like, this is not a guy that's he's
not over the hill.
No. I mean, this is a guy that is a premium player. So, and that's the way that he was viewed around the league. I had talked to several GMs who, they were really interested in Pacioretty because he's been a good player. So I like that trade. I knew, because I knew his agent was Alan Walsh, and Alan Walsh is a LA-based agent, and I saw him a few times in Vegas, and I thought, well, this just makes perfect sense. That having one of his clients so close to him and all that kind of stuff, and I'm sure he knows McPhee very well. So, I think this is the case of where, you get an agent involved who's got relationships with teams. And he said, if you get a chance, get my guy, he's in great shape. He would love it out here, blah, blah, blah. And it really worked out. And from Montreal's, what did you think of the prospect move, Russ?
Well, Nick Suzuki is a really good prospect. Actually, only in Montreal could Nick Suzuki go there and then be worried about his skating. Like I was saying yesterday, like I just saw him at the rookie showcase. Like, again, they're not on there playing, right? But he was moving around great. Like, I saw him in drills to get his picture taken. This kid can skate. He's been skating well for a year or two now. But originally that was the knock on him. And he was even asked that question when he first got there yesterday. And it's just like, you've got somebody now that can play center in a couple of years. They've got a string of centers now, and they have some defense. So I thought it's a hell of a pickup. He's a Canadian kid. He's not going to be overwhelmed by the market because he's always had a spotlight on him. But he's a really smart kid, and he's a good two-way player. And they don't have a lot of those guys. And just literally just 12 hours before, Vegas writers were writing about Suzuki like he could make the team. Like, there's a chance he could make the team. And so it's just amazing going from one market to the next, how that sort of, changed a little bit. And that's the craziness of Montreal.
Yeah, and I think that Montreal has finally grasped the fact that they're a rebuilding team. I'm hoping for their sake that they don't rush the Kotkaniemi, who they drafted 3rd overall, to the NHL as an 18-year-old. Let him mature. Suzuki's a good prospect. Russ has talked about Ryan Poehling, one of their other first-round picks from last year, I believe, or 2 years ago. That is a prospect. So they have prospects up the middle, and Shea Weber is going to be out until January, and Carey Price is probably going to have to carry them on their back for them to get wins. But I think they're going in the right direction because they really weren't going anywhere over the last few years with some of the moves that they made. And I think that in the end, it's going to be beneficial to them. But
and look, Suzuki had 100 points last year. Some people will say, well, what could he possibly learn? Well, he was snubbed by Team Canada last year for the World Juniors. Let him go to the World Juniors and star there. That would certainly make Canadians fans feel pretty good about things.
Now, Kevin, there's some – I'm sorry.
Well, I was just going to say, I like Suzuki as a prospect. I just thought they would get more, like a guy who's a little farther down the pipeline, and, that you could sort of cast what he was going to be already, where Suzuki still has we're not quite sure what it'll be. I think when he starts there, he'll start as a third-line center based on other guys they have. But I think he could be a second-line center, and if he hit big, sure, a first. But I think he could be a second-line center in this league. And
I think he's only a couple of years away, Kev. I don't think he's that far, but he still should wait.
Now,
what about Paling? Is he a number 2 as well?
Paling is an interesting one because he is one where, because of the size, you might put him as a second line center because he has good speed and he is a good faceoff guy too. So is Suzuki, but he sort of has the fit of a second line center a little bit more than Suzuki, but Suzuki's a little more higher skilled. I mean, that's where you have to sort of decide how you want to run the team, but Paling could be a second liner too.
And it would allow them eventually to move Durant back to the wing, where I think he's better suited. I think that was a bad move to put all that pressure on him to be the number 1 or number 2 center when I don't think he was meant to be that. I think he's much more successful on the wing, and if they do have these young guys come around in the next year or two, then they can have the luxury of moving Durant to the wing and be a ridiculous scoring threat.
Up in the same year, I would put Paling on second, Suzuki on third to start. And then if Suzuki really just lights it up and he's as dominant as he could be, then you just make the swap.
Now, Kev, there's some school of thought that the Pacioretty deal is sort of going to unlock a few things in terms of other trades. I know Darren Drager just said this morning that everything is pointing towards Erik Karlsson being moved from the Senators in the next day or two. You know, we've heard the speculation about Tampa Bay, Vegas still being in potential for a Karlsson move, Vancouver, all these different places. I mean, have you heard anything regarding something imminently happening with Karlsson?
Well, this is the second time that we've heard it was him, and I heard, it was like 10 days ago. I was told that it was going to happen the next 2 or 3 days based on the chatter that one of them said he heard. And he said, I'm not in it, but I really do think. And he told me he was pretty convinced that the Lightning was not going to be able to make it work because they didn't have enough assets that they could move. And he felt it was either going to end up, if he had to guess, based on the assets that he was saying, was either going to be Vegas or Vancouver that he thought. And he goes, don't rule out Vancouver. Vancouver, while it may seem a little bit strange, they have a willingness to give up assets, which he felt was actually quite surprising. So, we're going to have to see. To me, Vegas makes more sense now, particularly with Schmidt out for the first 20 games. And they really kind of were lacking that star. And I know Eklund always thought that it might too dramatically alter their game, but I don't think it would. I think Karlsson does what Karlsson does, but it's like sometimes coaches, when they have stars, they say, we're going to play this way except when he's on the ice, and then he's going to dictate how we play. And I think that's how you play with Karlsson.
Russ, I know that Drager intimated that possibly part of the package would be Shea Theodore, who's a restricted free agent, hasn't signed yet, and probably looking for big money. I'd be surprised if there was a deal between Vegas and Ottawa, it didn't include either Brandstrom or Cody Glass. That's probably what Ottawa is looking for. Yeah,
I don't think they'll get either one of them. I actually think it would be Theodore. I don't think they would get – I think Brandstrom would just go right into the lineup if Theodore left. I think that's the guy I think they would trade, and more, of course. But – they're not going to get Glass or Brandstrom, I don't believe.
I don't think so either.
Unless they have Karlsson signed to a deal, then you might be able to get one of them. But I doubt it because, again, if you look at Vegas' situation, they give up one of those guys. Their prospect system is getting a little weak already. Even though they did great that first year, last year wasn't as great as the first year. It would start to hurt them a little bit.
Yeah, Kevin, they've morphed into a now team. Paul Stastny, now the trade for Pacioretty. It's clearly a now team rather than let's do something 2 or 3 years down the road.
Yeah, but I think, my impression is, and that's why you didn't see why they didn't re-sign Perron or James Neal, is they're trying to be very careful and not to sign contracts that they're going to regret. Like they're still trying to behave as if, they don't have all the cap space that they do have. So they were willing to lose a couple of guys because they wanted to create some room. They wanted to bring in. I had heard for a while that Glass was the guy that was a lock to make the team this year.
I'd be surprised if he didn't, to be honest.
Yeah, no, that's so. And I just don't think. And to be honest, I think they would trade Theodore in a heartbeat. I mean, it's not that they don't like him.
Defenseman, like you get Shea Theodore, you're doing okay for yourself as part of the deal. I mean, it's not like he's
he's a decent player, but he's not a perfect defenseman. Like he's a puck moving defenseman, and I think we are kind of know what the type of guy that he's going to be. He's a guy that's going to help your offense a little bit and not.
But he could be in their second pair. Like they already have Thomas Chabot, so they don't really need that guy.
No. That's true. But I think they do have to give up more than Theodore. So now it becomes, who do they give up? So
I mean, if they get Theodore, technically they could trade Ceci then.
So
yeah. And CC signed a bridge deal, excuse me, it was arbitration, so they're paying him probably a little more than they wanted. I have to get your thoughts, Kev, on the unfolding Ottawa situation in the wake of that extremely weird video that Mr. Melnyk and Mark Borowiecki put out a couple days ago. It's been fodder for almost every hockey reporter and writer regarding how weird it was. And, sort of uncomfortable in the sense that, you ask a player who's got a year left in his contract to be the interviewer. You couldn't ask a reporter. You couldn't ask somebody who works for, one of the announcers. You asked one of the players. It was just bizarre.
It really was. And, it just sort of feeds into the impression that the Senators are an organization that's just in the midst of upheaval, and you just don't know where they're at or where they're going. They're a hard read, and Karlsson obviously will be dealt, and then where does this team stand? Do they really have a chance of getting Matt Duchene signed? I mean, he said he was at the NHL media tour and he said all the right things, but why isn't he signed yet if that's the case? Right. He likes playing there, but not enough to, ink a contract right now and, kind of move on. And, where would they be without him? I just think we're a long way from having any kind of certainty about where the Senators are heading.
Yeah, and Russ, Melnyk put some of his own players in a position to refute what he was saying. Matt, I got this from Murray Pam, my colleague at Sporting News. Matt Duchene noted there will not be 10 rookies in the lineup, but agrees there'll be an influx of young, fast players. Mark Stone said a rebuild could take weeks, 2 months, 2 years. He's not overly concerned about the comments of Melnyk. Craig Anderson stated he did not make a trade request this summer. So they're all sort of refuting what he said. And
that was the thing that I had said originally, Kevin, was like, he was so vague about everything. He never used one player's name. He never gave any examples of names. He didn't mention Erik Karlsson once. So this was just like hey, this is where I'm coming from. Now you're hearing from me kind of thing. And that's fine. Fans always do want to hear from owners. But right now, look, those guys that you're hearing from are professional hockey players. So regardless of what's swirling around, at the end of the day, Eugene Melnyk's up in the owner box and they're playing out on the ice and they only have to worry about what their coach says. And until they get traded, they really don't worry about it. And those other guys that are due contracts, Stone's going to get his deal and Duchene's going to get his deal. And that's why I don't think they're worried about that. Now, if you heard something like, hey, maybe the arena deal was in trouble, maybe you would get different quotes out of these guys. But they're not going anywhere, so I don't think that they should worry.
Yeah, okay. And I think, to me, it looked to be the kind of where the owner's trying to look engaged without really engaging.
Right.
Right. He didn't really engage and, didn't give us a sense of where, the team is. And, most owners, when they get in those situations, are quite blunt about what they're attempting to do. And he just made the situation worse. It made everyone wonder, like, where his head is at. And that made it the same as it was before, because I think we've all kind of wondered. I mean, there's no other organization where there's as much disenchantment as there is with what's going on in Ottawa.
A few notes here before we get to our team previews real briefly preview the Bruins and the Sabres today. John Tortorella signed to a 2-year contract extension, which isn't exactly a big surprise, Kevin, after they announced Jarmo Kekalainen and John Davidson's extension or last week, I believe it was. Tortorella's done a pretty good job since he's gotten there, but again, the Blue Jackets are sort of in that situation where, they may have a really good chance to win this year, but then the concerns about Bobrovsky and Panarin are there, so they give him an extension of 2 years.
Yeah, and I do think, I would say that Tortorella has connected with this team, and by that I mean he's with them and they're with him more than any team he's ever coached.
Yeah, I agree with that because
Seth Jones likes him.
Yeah.
Werenski likes him. He likes them. He is connected with the younger players on that group. I think he has sort of made peace with how he needs to act to be an effective coach. So I like this re-signing.
I mean, look, he always knew hockey, but I think he always tried to sort of, I don't know, maybe just go too far to try and show how good he was, overcompensate. And I don't think he does that anymore. And I think now it does work out for him.
Yeah, and this is more than just a golden parachute. I remember back in the day when Randy Carlyle got a 2-year extension from the Leafs, entering the final year of his deal, and you got Ron Wilson, the one that they announced on Christmas time. He got an extension of a year, and that was basically a golden parachute. That if he got fired, he would have an extra year. I don't get the impression that that's what's going on with Tortorella. He's had some genuine success, but I think that's, the success in Columbus is sort of perilous because we see, if Panarin and Bobrovsky leave, there's going to be a big change in the fortunes of the Blue Jackets.
Yeah, they need to have playoff success. That's their only. Everything else is pretty much conquered. Management's good, prospect pool is good, team is good. Now they've got to get further in the playoffs.
Well, statistically, teams are more apt to keep players than to lose them to free agency. We know that by the way it's worked out since the salary cap. But in the case of Columbus, I don't think that's true. I think there's a far greater chance that Panarin is leaving, and at best, I see Bobrovsky as 50-50.
Yeah, I think it's 50-50 too. And I'll tell you, not because of his play and not because of anything, but the fact that what was he making now? 7?
Bobrovsky over 7. I think 7.
Nobody likes to pay a goalie that much anymore. So and I don't think he'll take less. And I think that's the problem, is the starting point is probably too high.
Well, and this is a post-Carey Price contract. So it's, 7.425 he's making. Yeah. So, more than likely he's going to make more than Lundqvist. And Lundqvist is what, 8? Over 8?
Yeah.
So, okay, Lou Lamoriello had some interesting comments today regarding now, I don't know if he was specifically referring to John Tavares with the comment, but it's clear that that's who he was referring to when he said, there's no aftermath. Players come and go. It's different if they had won championships. It's different if they had had a lot of success. They haven't done much. So, I get, and I get what Lou is doing here. He is defending the team that he is the general manager of. That's his job. But honestly, the fault of, as we've talked about over the summer, the fault of Tavares leaving, I don't think it was on Lamoriello. It was on Garth Snow. It was on the ownership. It was on the whole situation with the arena in Brooklyn where they were going to play. It was a multi-system failure when it came to the Islanders and Tavares. And I don't think that, I know Tavares is, taking some heat from Islander fans who are disappointed, but I don't think it should all be on Tavares. And I think these comments are sort of blaming Tavares for leaving, which if I was him, I would have left.
Yeah, I didn't read that quite the same way. I mean, okay. I just think what he was saying is, it would be a much bigger deal if they had won championships and he left.
Sure.
And while he had a popularity and fans didn't want to see him leave, it's not like it's caused upheaval with the championship team. They were still struggling to find, themselves among a contender. And that's why, basically he said, this is not the end of the world that we lost, Tavares. So I'm sure that John is not going to enjoy reading that, but I didn't think it was as I saw on social media people were,
Yeah, you got to remember, Kevin. I'm looking at it through a Toronto prism, so
yeah.
Look, I took it a little bit that way, but then this is just Lou's really, the SOP for him. This is the way he operates. This is the way he builds a culture. But the problem that they're going to have this first year of doing that, it's all well and good that that's worked before for him, but this is a different market, and I guarantee you that fan base is still split about losing Tavares, and it might take until the Leafs get there and Tavares scores a hat trick against them to really get that point across that, all right, we have to sort of turn the page on this guy. But right now, for a little while going into this season, there's a cloud of Tavares on him. There's no way around it. And to heave it all on Matt Barzal at 21 years old is going to be a lot to do too. I mean, that's the other problem is fans will want to do that. Lou won't do that. But the other problem with this team in general is nobody signed long-term on this team anymore. And so you don't know as a fan where they're at. Anders Lee hasn't been extended. Nobody's been extended. So, and again, that is one of the hallmarks of Lou. But at some point, you would think this season, you would want to start extending some guys once you see what you want to see out of them, because otherwise, who do you have?
I had two good moments with John Tavares in the NHL media tour. I was at the beginning of the interview and at the end of the interview. You get 11 minutes with all the stars one-on-one. And when he walked in, I shook his hand and I said, you surprised me by not staying with the Islanders. And he laughed. He goes, I surprised myself, he said, which I really, really liked. And then at the end, we were talking about, I told him to take care of my boy, Austin Matthews. He goes, the truth is I went to dinner with him and I told him, everybody's talking about I came here and I'm going to help you. I came here because I want you to help me. And I thought that was pretty good as well.
But that's how egoless he is. I mean, that's the reality of John Tavares. And so that's why it will be a great fit, because he doesn't have that huge ego.
And he's going to have I'll go out on a limb here and I think he's going to have a lot of success in Toronto this year. He's going to probably start the season with Zach Hyman and Mitch Marner, which is not a bad combo to start with. Now, yesterday I was at the Leafs scrimmage and that line was together, but Austin Matthews was playing with Patrick Marleau and Rich Clune, who's not even on an NHL contract. And the reason Rich Clune was playing was because William Nylander has not been there. Right. He's probably not going to be there. The opening of training camp is tomorrow. And Kevin, we've heard this story many and many a time. And a restricted free agent. He's looking. There's negotiations going on. Elliot Friedman and Darren Dreger are both reported that the Leafs and Nylander are far apart on an amount. Dreger reported $8 million on a long-term deal. I'll tell you right now, there is no way in hell the Leafs are signing Nylander for $8 million. It's supposedly they're looking to offer him closer to what Nick Ehlers is getting, which is $6 million, or Sean Monahan at a little over $6 million. But $8 million is not going to fly. I think this is going to end up being a bridge deal if the two parties don't get closer together.
Yeah, I think so too. You can't give him $8 million, to be sure. And it's, to me, it's, you're asking for that because it's Toronto.
Right.
It's that simple, because otherwise they wouldn't do that. I mean, everybody knows where the market is for those players.
Yeah.
And when you see, you got Tavares, you got Austin Matthews on team, you see the amount of talent. If you really want to be part of all that, you've got to come in at a more reasonable amount to be sure.
Well, here's the thing. This is how today's athlete sort of has changed, though, because you would think, hey, William Nylander looks at that team. They have John Tavares. They have Austin Matthews. Hey, we got a really good chance to get to the Stanley Cup this year, but I still want to get paid. And so at the end of the day, he's willing to hold out a camp, which doesn't happen a lot in hockey. I mean, we're seeing it unfold with Le'Veon Bell in the NFL, and that's gotten sort of contentious now, even though we all know he's going to come back for the last 6 games because he's going to want to get paid. And we all know Nylander is going to come walking in 2 or 3 days into camp too. But it's just, I don't know why they go to these lengths. I don't get it.
It may go longer than that, Russ. Remember, is my memory failing me? His dad He had a lot of negotiating problems. I think it was with the Rangers, and his dad is part of the negotiating team. He's part of the agency. Louis Gross is his agent, but his dad has a lot of influence here. To me, that smacks of this is going to be longer than just a couple days into training camp. It could last through camp, but they really have no leverage. There is no offer sheet here because there are no offer sheets, and the arbitration isn't.
I mean, Nylander has no leverage other than hoping the Leafs pay him what he wants. But look, Mike Babcock's going to be exactly like Tomlinson is for the Steelers, and he's going to pretend William Nylander doesn't exist.
Yeah, he's going to move. He'll move Casper. He'll move Casper.
That's what he's going to do.
Oh yeah, no, he'll move Casper Kapanen up, or he'll give Jeremy Bracco a chance or something of that nature.
Every couple days, he'll say something in the press just to sort of jab him a little bit, but not too hard. Like that's what Babcock's going to do. I'm sure of it.
Yeah, he'll enjoy that. He'll enjoy.
Yeah,
Nylander doesn't exist. So.
And Kyle Dubas, and this is his first. I mean, everybody says the Tavares negotiations. This is his first test. He cannot surrender and lose the battle to Nylander, because then he's got Matthews and Marner, and those are going to be, they could be tougher because and Marner is expecting to make a ton of money. Matthews, I think, is easier because you're just going to pay him because he's one of the best players in the league.
Right.
But he cannot succumb to Nylander. That's why I think the bridge, it's sort of like, let's go back to our corners for 2 years and just call it off.
What's going to happen. I think they're going further than that right now because they're trying. Yeah. But I do think that that's what's going to happen.
Okay. Two teams we'll talk about briefly here. The Boston Bruins. Now the Bruins went 50-20-12 last year, second place in the Atlantic. They lost in the second round in 7 games to Tampa Bay. Or sorry, not 7 games. They lost to, I think it was 5 games to Tampa Bay. A very good team. They were impressive against the Leafs in the first round. Kevin, they lose Rick Nash. I like where they are. They've added guys like Riley Nash. They have, or not Riley Nash. They lost Riley Nash. I think they're a deep organization. They've been able to turn over the roster. A guy like Charlie McAvoy is a really impressive young defenseman, and they've sort of grown past that core group that's still there from the 2011 Stanley Cup. I have high hopes for the Bruins in terms of success.
Yeah, me too. I mean, here they scored like a registered 112 points, I think, and nobody's paying attention. It's all about the Capitals and the Lightning and the Toronto Maple Leafs in the East. And, they're a really strong team, and they had 50 wins. And to me, why I like this team and why I'm bullish on them is that, as you mentioned, they've moved past they still have that key core group, with Marchand and Bergeron and so forth. But it's really the younger people that have really kind of powered them. And, Charlie McAvoy being among the most important. And I like this team. I think they're right there again. I think McAvoy is just going to get better and better. And I asked McAvoy in the media tour about Zdeno Chara, and he just said, just an incredible freak of nature. And, basically he's a 41-year-old whose body is like 31.
Right.
He is I believe he's a vegan. But he's just so careful in his eating and his preparation. I know Tuukka Rask told me last season that at 41, Chara's a better skater than he was 4 or 5 or 6 years ago. Like, he's improved as a skater. He's worked at that. And he's still a premium player. So I'm bullish on that. I think they could actually push Toronto or Tampa for that division championship. I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility.
Well, Russ, they were a one-line team through the playoffs, and they were able to get by Toronto because that line was so great. And from what I understand, they're probably going to try to move Pasternak down and create more of a 2-line offensive attack. I'm not sure if it's going to be with Krejci or not, but that makes more sense. But the thing that prevents them from having to be a team like on the rebuild is they have those veterans to depend on, but they have the McAvoys, they have the Brandon Carlos, they have the Grizzlies. There is that young group that is coming up as support players.
Yeah, and so their defense is pretty set right now that they've traded out of McQuaid. Their defense is set. But, like when you look at roster resource, I think their fourth line is set with like Nordstrom, Corrali, and Noel Arcari. That's a good fourth line, and their first line's pretty set. The rest isn't. And like they have Danton Heinen, penciled in. I think Anders Bork is better than Danton Heinen. So I think at the end of the day, it'll be Anders Bork and not Danton Heinen. Now, could Danton Heinen beat out Ryan Donato? Yeah. I mean, Ryan Donato is not a lock to make this team. I know people think he is, and I happen to like him because I like his shot. But if they don't give him a certain amount of ice time and a certain amount of shots per game, he's not going to be what you hope he's going to be. I mean, and so depending on how they're going to use him, it's not impossible that he's going to be in Providence. So they have a few spots up for grabs. For the most part, they're a solid team. The fact that Backus can play wing and doesn't have to play center helps them.
Right.
Krejci is a big deal, though, on this team. Like, it's still – if Krejci still gets hurt, then all of a sudden this team does get thrown into some problems because, then you're talking about Backus is back at center because, you just got Chris Wagner, but he's not going to play second-line center right now. Then all of a sudden they start having a center problem again. So Krejci, if he could actually stay healthy this year, I'm with Kevin. I think they can go far, but it is an if.
Yeah, that is because he has been injured. I agree with your assessment about Donato. He could go down, but I think he'll make the team. I think he's just kind of one of those X factors that he could get hot, and he's the type of guy, and this to be true. He could get 10 goals in 12 games, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I spoke to a couple people who went to the rookie tournament here in Buffalo where the Bruins are playing, and they thought the most impressive of their forward prospects was not Senyshyn, was not Trent Frederick, but was Jack Studnicka. So, I mean, I don't know if that means he has a chance of making the team or if he's a year away, but they have a deep pool of talent.
I wouldn't rush Studnicka in there. I wouldn't even rush Frederick in there, and Frederick's probably pretty close. But again, if you're putting Frederick in there, he probably would be where Wagner is, like that third-line center. So, Corrali's great as a fourth-line center. Like, I wouldn't mess with that. So, I don't know what Wagner was signed for. Was he 1 year, 2 years? I don't know.
Wagner was, I believe, 1 year.
Yeah, so let Frederick, marinate a little more. I think that's the better move.
No, it was 2 years. 2 years, 1.25 per year. So,
right, so let him, fight it out for him next year, I think.
Now, Kevin, you know me. I'm from Buffalo. I've never been a big fan of the Sabres, but I objectively look at this team, and they've been the worst franchise in the NHL over, I'd say, the last 4 or 5 years. But there's a reason for optimism now, and I think looking at the Sabres with now a 1-2 punch after trading O'Reilly of Eichel and Middlestat up the middle, a 1-2 punch on defense of Ristolainen and Rasmus Dahlin. You have the addition of Skinner. They have a Pozo. I think Reinhardt's got to get signed, but I think they have a pretty decent top 6. My question about the Sabres in terms of them stepping to that next level is I don't think their defense past those 2 defensemen is really that good, and the goaltending is a big question mark. But for those fans in Buffalo who are downtrodden about the Bills being good, I think that there's excitement about the Sabres, and I don't think they'll make the playoffs, but I think they're going to be a lot more exciting and a lot, moving in the right direction.
Well, what I would tell you is, and this is a preview of a piece I'm going to do next week, but at the NHL Media Tour, I did my annual survey of the 30 players that I interviewed, and one of the questions I asked was to give me a sleeper team, and I haven't tallied up the totals, but I can tell you that the question was posed, name me one team that you think you like better than a lot of other people do. And the Buffalo Sabres got a lot of votes. Players believe in the Sabres' talent. They like the skill that they've brought in. And it's not just Dahlin. It's, one of the best things that Botterill did was what he didn't do is he didn't trade Ristolainen, in my opinion, because that gives them 2 skilled guys with Dahlin moving in there. I do share your concern about their defense because they haven't done that. But if they show any kind of success early on, I think they'll address that by going out and getting a veteran defenseman. But their offense, I think, is deep. I think they have a lot of guys with the potential to score some goals. So this is a really fascinating team. I don't know that it can come together to make the playoffs, but you can't totally rule it out, I guess. But this team is finally on its way, it seems.
Yeah, this is going to be a lot of pressure for Phil Housley now to get these guys to produce. If he starts getting bad results out of these guys, I think that seat could get pretty hot pretty quick. you look at their defense, Nathan Beaulieu is a guy who I think can be still a good defenseman. If he could bounce back, it does help him. Look, Bogosian and McCabe are a little bit slower guys, but they do block shots and they do have a role. It's not the worst defense in the league, so it's just like a little below average, I think. But their forwards are above average, and like even what they have proposed here as a fourth line of Rodriguez, Gergensons, and Tage Thompson is really enticing. And actually, if they started off with that and Thompson did catch a little fire, you could trade Gergensons and make Thompson your center, like no problem at all.
I think that the strength of this team is not only the forwards I mentioned, Eichel, Pozo, Skinner, etc., but they have a third line guys like Sobotka, like Jason Pominville, who's a longtime Sabre, who's a veteran guy. Yep. They added Connor Sheary basically because Pittsburgh had to get rid of him because of salary reasons, and he's a speedy guy. And one of the problems with the Sabres last year was not a lot of speed other than guys like Eichel, and now with Skinner and I think with Sheary, you have guys who can stretch the zone a little bit. But I keep going back to Bogosian is an injury waiting to happen. It's been that way the last few years. Scandell is a decent veteran. McCabe, I don't think is a problem, but I just don't think the defense, the depth on defense is there. But Carter Hutton and Linus Ullmark. Ullmark is I think he can be a good goaltender, but you're probably going to throw him in for 30 to 40 games. Right. And Hutton had his best year of his career this past year with St. Louis. I just don't think he's that goalie. I think he's the goalie from before, from St. Louis and Nashville, not the goalie who had the best goals against or one of the best goals against in the league.
I think if Kyle Okposo returns to like 55-point form, let's say he does that, that's a big boost for them. Like then you're talking about this team sort of hanging around if the goaltending's good. If the goaltending is just average with that defense, then they're still going to struggle a bit, but they'll score goals. Like that's where I think they're at.
Kevin, anything finally you want to talk about? Any items in the league that are on the top of your head?
I did a story on Voynov. I asked Bill Daly about him at the media tour, and he said that they're just now starting the formal process. I think they were trying to reach some level of negotiation where there'd be kind of a settlement about but whatever it is they were offering, Voynov didn't take it. So now they're going through a formal investigation. And this goes all the way back. They're actually investigating what happened in 2015 with the actual, situation that got him suspended. So he did tell me that he was aware. He didn't know specifically whether any teams would be willing to take Voynov, but he said there were some teams that were kind of exploring what the reaction would be to that. So.
There is a story on Yahoo that's funny about Austin Matthews getting drug tested. He apparently got drug tested right after his 4-goal debut, but he got drug tested a lot last year. So he was just like, he was sort of taking it like, I know it's random, but this is getting a little silly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a little bizarre. I mean, I can understand after the 4-goal game, the first game in the NHL, and he scores 4 goals, immediately you're dope testing him. Come on.
And here's the other thing: Jalen Ramsey now is saying something in the works with the NHL. I got to tell you, if the NHL is doing something with him, they're making a mistake because fans didn't like what he said. I don't think this is going to be a good marketing campaign or commercial or any kind of publicity stunt. I think it's a bad idea.
Fans didn't like it. Players didn't like it. I mean,
players
I think the comments
didn't like it.
Yeah, I mean,
Kevin definitely was there to hear that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it could be funny. It just it just depends on how it's presented,
Yeah. Put him on the ice and let him fall around, and we'll say in 6 months.
I mean, it could be totally funny. It just depends.
I mean, if they hadn't taken skating lessons with Connor McDavid, great. But anything short of that is people aren't gonna like it.
Yeah. All right, guys, great show. We will be back tomorrow, probably at 3:00 with the opening of training camp. Russ, are you going to training camp tomorrow?
Yeah, I'll be there Friday.
Okay. All right. For Kevin Allen, for Russ Cohen, I'm Michael Agello. Thank you for watching, and remember, without the buzz, it's just hockey.